Well, everybody, thank you again. My name's Randy Josselyn, and this is our Webinar Wednesday series that we've been talking about. We talked about it enough already, so I'm just going to kind of move on and introduce the team that is here with us today. This agenda is 60 minutes in length. It's a moderated forum style, so we're going to have ongoing Q&A with options for attendees to participate. So I mentioned that already, so we definitely would love to hear from you. We have a great team. Grant Rozich is joining us today. Hi, Grant. Grant's probably on mute still, so he's waving over there.
There you go.
Hey, Grant's the Senior Architect, Sales and Ticketing Systems at Palace Entertainment. Started the industry as a ride attendant or a lifeguard in the water park industry. As probably a 12-year-old or something.
No, I was 18. I started as a ride attendant.
Well, so he's got some great background in history, rides and attractions, and obviously on the technology side. We also have Brian Vauter joining us from Bachelor Bridge Caverns. Brian, I love this because you're the cavern geologist that is also somehow the ticketing administrator and IT director. Is that right? Oh, you're muted too, Brian. I'm sorry.
Hey, Randy. Yep, that's how I started it.
And this is
many years ago.
This is you inside the caverns, and Brian's going to share with us a little bit about what some of their strategies and plans are as they reopen a cavern that already has limited capacity as well. Jarrid Vaughn is back, and I asked Jarrid to hop on and see. We were just having some great casual conversations, and he had some really great insight last week. So Jarrid's the Senior Manager of Visitor Experience and Fun at the Cincinnati Zoo. So he's joining us as a panelist today as well. Hi, Jarrid.
Hello.
And then moderating today, Matthew Hoenstine, our destinations principal. Hi, Matthew. And myself, Randy. So really, I think it's important to look at the industry for a moment here and kind of think about why we're here. So I think that poll really helped us out. And if I wanted to start with this. Jarrid, Grant, Brian, when do you guys plan on reopening your attraction?
That's a good one, Randy.
It's a good question.
Right, it's a good question. I mean, all of us on the phone are interested in reopening probably as soon as possible. Would that be right? If we
Correct.
could. But we saw that big list, and we realized there's going to be some challenges there. We want to open, but we want to be safe. We want to operate efficiently. We want to make sure everyone is safe and is willing and able to come. So there was a really good article in Barron's just a couple days ago where Bob Iger was interviewed about what's the feeling and the perception at Disney, and the conversations that we're having right now at this very moment are the same conversations that every institution has been having. All of us here have been discussing, what do we have to do to return to some semblance of normal, some normalcy. But we understand that people need to feel comfortable and people need to feel safe. So this is a great article. The link is going to be included in the presentation notes. But there's this other thing that's happening, which is there's this idea that when we know when this ends, that the public is really going to be ready and willing to excitedly come and visit our attractions. And they're probably appreciating it more than we know. I was watching some Good News, which is a great little YouTube, and there was a video of a father taking his kid on a virtual roller coaster and spraying her with water. And there's the need to visit our attractions because we know our attractions put smiles on people's faces. But there's this balance here. And I really think that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, what we need to, in order to examine where we're going, we have to look backwards and see where we are in the world, right? So here's an article from CNN just a couple days ago. Tourist sites are becoming packed. There's a video on this link that I encourage you guys to watch, and there's a scene that's happening today in Shanghai or Beijing or anywhere in China right now that for all of us on this webinar, most of us are feeling, wow, that is not happening in America. That's not happening in London. We're not seeing people out. Obviously we see people with masks in this picture, but we're not seeing this happen. and there's changes. This is someone, I believe, at maybe a KFC in China or some restaurant where they've just walked in with their phone and they're having their body temperature taken just so they can pick up their food. Something else happened over the weekend, and Matthew, why don't you give us a little explanation of what's happening here?
Yeah, so as you see, one of the things that started in China is some relaxing and some, returning to normalcy. One of the ways that the country and some of the attractions were trying to really celebrate that was recognizing that folks had been pent up in their homes for quite a while. And so, the national parks decided to waive their entry fees. So I think when you have this kind of perfect storm of a lot of folks that are eager to get outside and a very low cost to entry, unfortunately you end up with situations like this where in this situation that attraction actually had to shut down and start denying entry just because of the volume. So I think one of the reasons that I bring this up is as we think about how we reopen and what we do from maybe a ticketing officer standpoint or whatnot, we obviously have to deal with both ends of the spectrum. We know right now we have nobody attending the attraction and we want lots, but we also can't have a situation where we have everybody attending the attraction. So as we think of our pricing and our promotions and how we're going to kind of reopen, I think this is one of the things that's important to consider. One of the other things that we've seen is, recently the Great Wall, a portion of the Great Wall in Beijing began to reopen. And if you've ever had the opportunity to visit that, it's, got a couple things going for it when it comes to, COVID-19. One is it's outdoors, it's fresh air, and things like that. However, it also has narrow spaces on the wall where you're not going to be able to get large amounts of people together and still maintain some general distance. So one of the things that we've seen that they've done there, Randy, I don't know if you would mind advancing one, is even here, prior to visiting the attraction, they're implementing temperature checking. So making sure that one, those folks that are entering the attraction are not displaying symptoms of a fever, which I think is and we heard this a little bit in the Bob Iger article, is that's helping show security on two fronts. One, security to and safeness to the folks that are visiting the attraction of kind of what barriers they had to cross to enter that they know everyone else did, and so they kind of have a better comfort level. The second thing that we're seeing that they're doing there is, choosing to limit the attendance to 30% of their normal capacity. So while, that wall is several miles long and can hold, tons and tons of folks, they're going to go ahead and say, hey, we're only going to allow 30% of what we normally would, so that we can make sure that we're creating the experience that we need to and that we're not generating any issues as a result.
Well, we have a lot of comments and questions already. People are talking a little bit about, I can see Peggy's question here about temperature. I mean, how does temperature checks work when people are asymptomatic? Peggy, we're going to actually take a little deeper dive into that in a couple of slides as I show you a little bit about some of the other places. And John, we see your hand up, so I'll call on you in a moment here, but we're going to show you a little bit more of what we're seeing out of China. This year is an article that was in the Jakarta Post. I believe this was also on Monday, and this is really a conversation of what's happening at some of these flagship Chinese attractions. And we do know that the Disney parks are still closed, but some of these other parks are reopening. And we're definitely seeing some steps that are being taken today that your attendees have to follow, that your guests are following. And this is a really great article because this is a month ago, and I don't want to dwell on this too long here, but Matthew, this is one article about Happy Valley reopening in Shanghai a month ago. Can you walk us through that?
So I think there were a couple, good learnings from this. One is they obviously what we're all doing today is we're preparing. We're thinking about what are we going to have to do when we reopen. And for them, they did two specific things that they addressed in the article. One was kind of anti-pandemic drills, like so preparing for how they're going to deal with situations that might arise in this now post COVID-19 initial experience rollout. The second thing is how are they going to adapt the service that they provide? So how do the things that so naturally we had no problem with contact, how do we start dialing that back and consciously educate our employees and our teams to avoid those? And then what did they actually start changing? One was from a park entry standpoint, they moved to 100% online purchase process. That did a couple of things for them, right? One, it helped them to understand the demand so that they could plan for the demand, so they could control the demand. Two, it avoided a lot of direct interactions where maybe it's a little bit more difficult to prevent some of the contact that you'd like to prevent at that time. They also implemented the temperature checking as you're going in. And I will point out that if anyone's ever traveled to Asia, the concept of temperature checking is much more prevalent throughout the airport experience and the travel experience. And so I think from a general standpoint, it's much more something that culture is accustomed to. Whereas maybe in the United States, it's going to be a little bit more foreign if we end up implementing that. The other thing from an entry standpoint, they limited their attendance to about half of their normal capacity. And then they tweaked the in-park experience as well to try to leverage how do we use virtual queues versus physical queues. We still want to leverage the kiosks because they remove that direct person-to-person interaction, but how do we make sure that they're safe, right? So we're disinfecting between each use, or we're making sure that there's sanitization stations nearby. And then the other thing I think that was important is they really are focusing on using just the outdoor space and preventing the use of the indoor space so that they can leverage the natural airflow that they have outside and prevent kind of the bottlenecks and the tight situations that folks may get into in an indoor space in this initial kind of opening back up. And so Randy, we can continue. I think that, in addition to what they've done there from the park is also what they've done on a marketing standpoint.
Yeah, I really love this. This is actually, so I went to their website, and this is their website currently. I can't read everything in Chinese, but something that you can see obviously is that they're embracing this concept that the guests are going to be wearing masks. It's going to be part of the normal experience for your attendees. And this is the first image that we've seen. Matthew and I have been scouring the internet for pictures like this, and of course we've seen pictures of guests at attractions wearing masks. But to actually see a company embrace that, like, this is normal. You should be comfortable. It's in their marketing materials, and you could see it right here with the guests, safely riding a merry-go-round. To go a little deeper on their website, this is actually brings us back to the beginning of exactly what we need to be doing for our customers, right? For our customer base. They're not going to visit us if they're not feeling safe. And so this is a great way that Bob Iger's quote is very appropriate. It kind of ties us all back together. It says, hey, when we reopen, we have to do it safely. If you read the article in Barron's a little bit, Bob talks a little bit about the post 9/11 world, where there were things that we were willing to give up as we were going places, traveling certain places. The lines were longer, and some things have stayed, and some things have disappeared. There were restrictions that I recall at the airport that we no longer do, but there's a few that are remaining, like the taking off your shoes, for instance. But then there's also been optimizations. We've taken the TSA pre in the U.S. and some of the global entry programs. We've been able to say, wow, for this subset of people, we're going to innovate, we're going to change, and we're going to allow these tools to help people bypass these areas with different screening. If you do go to their website, going back to Happy Valley, you can see they've done a lot. This is right from their FAQ. This is a Google Translate, but something I want you to notice is that they shut down, number 3, they shut down completely their ticketing booths. Everything has to be bought online. You have to have an ID, a government ID, and you have to have a name associated with every ticket so they know who's going to be coming, and they can also link that. Now that starts to go back to how do we make sure that people are healthy when they come in. You can also see that the Shanghai Dynamic Health Code, this is number 5, is required, that everybody has to be green when they enter the park. There's going to be a body temperature check as well. And then if there's an issue, there's actually a temporary quarantine area. And then, of course, it says, that guests are really going to be required to wear masks. So let's talk a little bit about the Shanghai Dynamic Health Code. This is something that, this is an article from Blue Loop that you can click to. But really, as travel is moving from place to place, we're starting to see Alipay and WeChat and other tools in China require you to display your personal code. Green means you're free to go and travel and go to visit an attraction. Yellow means you're on a 1-week quarantine, and red is a 2-week quarantine. Now, this is probably something that won't have probably wouldn't be able to happen here in the U.S. very quickly. But we're starting to hear grumblings of this. I have Andy Poby. He's our director of our Gateway Ticketing UK office. Andy and I were chatting about this, and I was on a meeting previously with a webinar where we started to discuss this. Andy, can you give a little insight of what might be coming in London or in your region?
Yeah, sure, Randy. So almost the holy grail of this whole situation globally at the moment is the antibody test. So we can people have had the or have immunity to the disease. That's almost more important than the vaccine. That's going to be anything from 12 to 18 months' time out, according to the UK papers and news sources. So one thing that our health secretary, part of our government, was talking about on the news 2 days ago was the idea of a certificate or a wristband or something like that. So that if you've had the antibody test and you've proven as immune, you get this wristband and you can go and live your normal life. I've heard, or there have been similar conversations at a similar process in Germany, where they have national identity cards, so they're more used to that kind of stuff. So it's something that we're very nervous about as a society, getting involved in this. But if there's a way of me getting a certificate or a wristband that lets me go out and go to the pub rather than having to stay at home and not do anything, then I'm going to sign up for that voluntarily.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and I think we could see that there's going to be some level of requirement that people have a little bit type of health screening, maybe to engage in certain activities. It might not be just visiting a zoo or an attraction, but maybe doing something a little bit more personal. I'm going to turn this over to the panel as well, Grant or Brian or Jarrid. I'm just curious, have you guys had any conversations about maybe some experiences that might require a clean bill of health? I mean, Jarrid, maybe some of your backstage VIP events where you have animals involved. I'm just wondering if you guys have even thought about this in conversations.
We've had very light initial conversations as they surround our behind-the-scenes experiences, because those folks are going in and getting super close to a number of animals, just with either a temperature check or a temperature check and having the visitor sign off that they agree that they have not had a temperature or symptoms within X amount of time. We're still working through all of that, but we're looking very close at CDC recommendations, and we're going to be going off of that. In addition to that, sending something in addition before their experience, probably via CRM that will automatically fire off and just say something along the lines of, you're agreeing by coming and arriving to zoo grounds that you haven't had a temperature and haven't had any symptoms, just as a heads up before they even arrive.
I think we're kind of in the same boat as Jarrid. We've had very high level conversations about what kind of health screenings, if any, we would do at a facility. It just depends on the interaction level. One of the things that we always look at is how is this going to impact the guest experience. I think we're definitely in a new a new world right now where people are more tolerant of, seeing people with face masks or having their temperature checked. Whether or not we want to go there or not is still up in the air, but it's definitely one of those things that if the CDC is recommending it, if the local government agencies are recommending it, we would follow those guidelines. But we haven't had any concrete decisions on it or one way or another. It's just one of those things that was just floated around as an idea for us to implement at some of our facilities.
Yeah, and I think Daniel Ferguson had a question in our chat about, do we anticipate masks being used by the attractions? And I'm going to start first about talking about my local grocery store. It was probably 3 or 4 days ago. I made my 5th trip out of my house. That was my 5th time visiting, and we had to get some items from the grocery store. And it was the first time that I saw the employees at my grocery store actively wearing masks. Up until then, I just saw random guests going out, but I would absolutely consider that employees might be wearing masks. Grant, you and I talked about this too. It's like,
Yep.
Will you have your guests? Will you have your employees wear PPE and whatnot as they're interacting? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so we had a conversation the other day about it, and again, it goes back to that what guest experience you have. As a former attractions operator, this is something that I would think about. If we had an incident, how are we going to respond to it? How are we going to make the guests feel comfortable? Safety is always our number one concern, but on the flip side of it, where do you draw the line? Do you go too far, or do you don't go far enough with your PPE? Is it something where for us to open and we're required to have our team members wear masks or protective equipment, then by all means we'll do it. But if it's not required, what image are you sending to the guests? And I really think it just depends on how this situation evolves and what the new norms actually extend into. If I was making a decision for the park that I used to be the ops director at, I would say, I would leave it up to the individual team members almost to say, if you feel comfortable doing it, that's great. If you don't, but that's not really a good policy for a company to have. I think you have to have a clear direction one way or another. Are we going to require our team members to wear masks, or is it going to be optional? But I think that really depends on the individual environments. It really depends on what you're displaying to the guests too.
Right.
Because you could go too far. We could put everyone in moon suits with their own breathing apparatus. But it's cumbersome to the environment that they're in. Operating a ride, operating a fryer, those kinds of things. Or do we just go with the bare minimum? I think it's a conversation that each facility is going to have and figure out what is the best fit for their operation and their guests to make sure that everyone is as safe as possible without limiting the functionality of the team member or the experience of the guest. I mean, we could, if you wanted a 100% safe environment, put your team members in moon suits and you have one guest walk in at a time, you're going to be fine. You'll have time to sanitize after them. But operationally, that's really not something that's effective. So I think it really depends on how things pan out. I think we're definitely going to have to make some adjustments to how we operate, whether it's putting hand sanitizer at each ride so that the team members can sanitize their hands. Obviously we're not going to put washing stations at every ride. But that would be an option. You could put something there for them to wash their hands, for the guests to wash their hands. It comes down to how often do we sanitize the ride? People are touching things every time you go through a ride cycle. So are we going to have a team member? We're going to staff more people to go through and wipe down the ride after every operation. Those are things that are 6 months ago we would have thought was crazy. We would never have these conversations, but now these are conversations that have to take place to figure out what is the best operational, what can fulfill your operational objectives the best, and also make sure that you're keeping the safety of your team members and guests as your top priority. So again, it goes back to each individual facility. For us as a company, it's conversations that are being had and trying to figure out what direction we want to go in. But I think time will tell. And I think it goes back to your example, Randy, of after September 11th, things were really locked down and then we slowly started loosening up some of the restrictions or figuring out ways to streamline them.
Yeah, we're having such good conversations in the chat here. A couple things that I'm seeing on is that, smiling is a huge part of our business. It's in our hospitality DNA, and wearing a mask, it doesn't communicate a smile. So, maybe training people to smile more with their eyes and giving more thumbs up and things that they can be doing. And a couple things I saw also on some good news, I guess that we all should watch that, is somebody made some masks for people that are hearing impaired that maybe read lips. And so there are masks available that show their mouth. And so that could be something that we end up doing if you need to, right? So having something where you can actually see the lips moving, and that could also be to communicate important instructions. And I love Jonathan mentioned branded face masks are going to be huge. You're right, it's possible. Who would have thought that 3 months ago we'd be sitting here talking about an attraction branded face mask that you maybe give away or sell?
So Randy,
yeah.
I can't help but think of not only attraction branded face masks with the smile pre-printed for the employees, but also even for the guests. I think of a zoo where you have one of those duckbill style masks in the souvenir shop that's actually painted like a duckbill. I mean, you have a whole bunch of little kids walking around dressed as ducks. So there's definitely
Write that down, Bill.
There's definitely I would imagine that our industry will find a way to put a smile on people's faces regardless of the PPE that is going to be required. And we might even be, as a business, you might need to start procuring purchases now for when you're planning on opening, because if I'm wanting to feel safe at your attraction and I see other people wearing masks and I don't have mine because I didn't have it, I might need to go to your health center, to your first aid, or wherever you have and ask for one. And you might just need to give them to the guests. I mean, that's what I think as an operator I'd be doing as well. To where my water park had years and years ago, when we would buy an unlimited supply, it seemed, of infant diapers and water diapers, swimming diapers, right? And we'd give them away all the time because it was just the right thing to do. So you can imagine that you're going to need those supplies as well. So I'd encourage us to be thinking about that too. We've had so many good chats. We're gonna keep moving on, but before I do that, John has his hand up, and John, we're gonna unmute you. I think you have a question or a comment about something that we've talked about. John, why don't you go ahead and chat or ask your question to the panelists or give us your thoughts. All right, John didn't mean to have his hands up, so we'll come back to him if he wants to, or if she wants to chat. I want to make sure it could be Jean or Jean. But we're going to kind of move on a little bit and take a deeper dive into some of these areas, and we're doing our best to answer our questions as we're going. So bear with us if you have a question that hasn't been answered. The context here is this. This is my house, and this is my grocery store, most of the pictures. I look at the grocery store completely different. What am I touching? Do they have hand sanitizer? We've got items kind of not available. I got to open this drawer, this thing. This is a Walmart picture. I didn't take that picture at Walmart. But, we got tapes on the ground. We have to start thinking differently about the entire experiences, right? And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to look at our guest journey at your attraction, whether it's a zoo or a theme park or an aquarium. We're going to take a deeper dive, and we're only going to spend a few minutes in each of these areas. But this is really to have some conversations about what is happening. And so really our guest experience is online. And I've been all over the internet checking out our locations about what's on the internet. And what I'm seeing is a lot of temporary websites, right? A lot of us have put up temporary content that we didn't maybe have in the past, or content that we just created immediately just to help our guests as they're navigating. Now, we might realize that some of this becomes permanent. So that in everything that we're going to talk about, we're going to have to ask ourselves, this is a permanent change. Are we permanently going to have to do our restrooms differently? Is our parking lot going to just be different forever? Or is it something that's temporary that we're going to be able to lift that puzzle piece off later? So some of the things we're starting to see, Winchester Mystery House, their main website, Fun at Home. We can see the coloring books, and we can see these fun games because we have this audience of people that are looking for interaction, and we as an attraction can provide that virtually for them. So we're starting to see that. We're seeing a great shift to vouchers and gift cards. Lots of our nonprofits are using this time to really collect some good donations. But a lot of our for-profits are just closed. I've clicked on many of your websites, and there's no tickets available. We're not even trying to make a sale right now, and that's okay. There's a little bit of fear there. but it's possible that maybe this is an opportunity to help prepare for the future with some partnerships or whatnot. The zoo, Jarrid, this is your website. You've really communicated the zoo's closed, but you have a strong message to continue your emergency operating fund. That's still going strong, right, Jarrid?
Yes. Yeah, we're still bringing in plenty in donations daily. Our marketing team has done an amazing job at thinking outside the box at creative opportunities. So I don't know if everyone's heard of the website where you can do cameos, but we actually loaded Fiona on there. So we're doing Fiona cameos, and you can purchase one of those, and our animal care team assists with that. So that's really cool. It's not super expensive, but it still brings in a good amount of money. And those requests were kind of there before, where people would reach out to us from, say, Florida and say, my fiance is obsessed with Fiona, and you know, we would really love it if somebody could wish her a happy birthday. Well, now that's bringing that into reality, but then also utilizing it during this time too to help raise some money. We're also looking at community partners to help us out as well. So Cincy Shirts is a local company that does t-shirts, and they do all sorts of different things about Cincinnati. They are doing a shirt currently that they put on sale, and we sold a ton of them in the first day. That's basically our zoo is a keeper with a picture of a hippo on the front of it, and it's a really creative design, and those funds go directly to our emergency operating fund.
That's cool. And and for our nonprofit friends, you know, obviously this is a great time to get support, but this is also a really good time to share information. I mean, we're kind of all in this together, and I got a bit of a smile on my face as I was checking out some other folks' websites, because this is the Bronx Zoo's call to action, and this is the San Diego Zoo's call to action. You know, so here these two zoos are separated by 3,000 miles, but one of them looked at the other and thought, that's the perfect call to action. And I love this too, because it says we're here together. And that's exactly what I want to get out of this. It's clear that there's going to be lots of conversation that are going to continue to happen. I just want to let everybody know this webinar is going to go long, and we understand that a lot of you are going to have to drop off, but we're going to just keep this webinar going. I'm not ending it now, but we were originally going to end in about 15 or so minutes. We're just going to probably take it up to an hour and a half, because there's a lot of good content that we want to get through, and we definitely want to share. You know, Palace, you know, very prominently communicating some updates, some information on the website. And here's a couple of lessons learned that we really think that we need to start thinking about. You're going to need to communicate changes to your business. This is the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach. They didn't shy away from purchasing tickets. They just clearly stated that they're closed, but that you can purchase tickets. The tickets are good for a year. And they have some other communications that are going out to their teams or to their customer base saying, you know, please help us out. Buy your ticket. We will reopen, and this is the best possible price that you can get. So you can see here that they've got a little bit of a discount here, about $5 on their product. And they're updating their graphics like you saw previously, shifting to advanced sales. And we are starting to see some folks sell retail food and beverages online. And Brian, I think the Natural Bridge Caverns is starting to explore those options as well. Is that right?
Yeah, Randy, we're looking at, we actually had a retail web page decades ago, back when it, you know, they were like several $1,000s to get spun up, because they were new and kind of a fresh idea, and it didn't do a single thing for us. But we're now having to rethink that. You know, it's been well over 20 years since we tried to have a retail web presence other than ticketing, you know, for just actual retail items, T-shirts, mugs, hats, things like that, souvenirs. And so we're having to reopen a bunch of things and, you know, kind of cobble something together pretty quickly. And we're still in process with that. We're relearning a bunch of stuff. You know, shipping is taxable in most states. And so, you know, how are we going to handle that? And then fulfillment with a minimal staff that we have now employed still. We also have to take that into consideration as well. So, but we are looking into it. It's definitely forced us back into re-examining a bunch of old assumptions that we previously thought we had put to bed.
Yeah, on the topic of online, to answer a couple questions that are coming through the community, it is important to communicate the change of your business. That, for instance, you, Brian, you might just say, hey, you can still enjoy these great things and items from our establishment. You have a sluice where you can play with these rocks, and you could almost sell that sluice kit so that you could have the kids experience that in their bathtub or in their sink, and you give them some fun instructions on how to mine for those rocks. So it builds that attachment. It's a good gift. It's something that you could take at home. When I was a kid, I used to pan for gold at Knott's Berry Farm, and selling a kit that has all that, that's something I would totally do in a second with my kids.
Yeah.
So it would be cool. So kind of shifting our strategy, about some of the questions that came in. We had a questions about many guests come to trust the services of their favorite establishments. How are we going to reestablish the safety in the minds of guests and each other? I would say a lot of that's going to be communicating. I would say online, I would communicate similarly to the FAQ I just saw with Palace. I'm going to back up a little bit. This is a really good opportunity for someone that loves Dutch Wonderland to say, we love you too. We get your most up-to-date information here. We're in it together. When we're going to open when it's safe to open, or we're going to open in such a manner that communicates safety. So that is some marketing messaging that you're going to have to do, like we showed with maybe rebranding some of your images on your website, where people are enjoying your attraction in a safe manner, and the new safe might be wearing masks. And Stephanie, you're totally right. Stephanie Wood had a question about, refunding guests. You do have a lot of guests that perhaps need their money back. And, my best advice was something that we saw last week, was just communicate with them. If you're a nonprofit, say, would you mind considering donating your money back? If not, click here, and then be realistic with expectations. Tell your customers that it might take a little bit to process those refunds, because everybody has short staffs right now. So Stephanie, I would encourage you to consider turning and converting that money into hopefully a donation, extending the life of those tickets, or maybe simply just saying, bear with us, we'll get the money back to you. But it's definitely communication is key. We're going to shift a little away from online now, and we're gonna imagine that it's hopefully as soon as possible, and we're about to reopen. So we have another quick poll here. I think this is a selectable poll. Is that right, Bill? I think it's a poll about parking operations.
Hello, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Yes, this is a multiple choice, some fill-in, but just a couple quick questions here on how you plan on handling your parking. So that poll is opening up right now, and everybody should see that coming up on their screens. We're just going to allow a minute or two for people to answer that.
Right now, so yeah, a minute or two. Did you charge for parking previously? Yes or no? Do you plan on charging for parking after reopening? Yes, no, eventually, but not right away. That's under discussion. And then there's an open-ended question. What changes do you plan to make to handle parking? I do know personally parking is a huge revenue stream for most of our businesses that operate a paid parking lot. Some of our friends on the phone might be part of municipalities. You're not allowed to charge for parking, but parking nonetheless is still going to be a concern. Even if you don't charge for parking, how are you going to handle the parking lot? I mean, are you going to let people park in every stall? Are you going to need a social distance parking? We're all very familiar with being parked at Universal or Disney and some of these attractions where they're taking you every single line, and you're parking right next to the person, and I guarantee you we're closer than 6 feet. So what does a parking strategy look like when we do reopen? Do we have enough spaces to accommodate skipping every other car? So it's definitely going to be pretty interesting as we reopen. So it looks like we have 30 seconds left on our parking poll. In the meantime, what we're going to do is, if you want to contribute to the parking conversation, if you have an idea, we absolutely want to hear from you. We're going to encourage you guys to raise your hands, and we're going to show a couple of bullet points and some updates on our end about some parking ideas, things that you can do in your attraction. So, Bill, will these just pop up on your screen when they're all done?
No, it'll be about 15 seconds after the poll closes.
Okay.
So yeah, we're in that countdown now, and then I'll be able to share the results. In the meantime, while we're waiting, I did want to throw in there that from a guest perspective, you are absolutely right on the communication. My family is season pass holders for Dutch Wonderland, and we have friends who are, and all of us have flocked to that website and been very happy for the clear communications that were sent out of what's happening. So just reinforcement while we're waiting. All right, so those results are ready.
And it looks like we had a couple of responses too about not being able to put some information into number 3, but wow, it looks like pretty evenly, we pretty much evenly mixed between charging for parking and not charging for parking. And that same group probably plans on charging for parking. It looks like 15% said yes. Well, I'm going to get rid of the no answers. So it looks like we're pretty much right down the middle. It's still, we're under discussion. There's a good amount of people that are talking about what parking could look like. That's definitely some good information. I'm going to turn this over to Matt to talk a little bit about parking, because there are so many questions to go through here.
And I think, one of the reasons that we bring up parking is that's obviously an area where, we have a toll booth in most situations. We're interacting directly with a car, reaching in or making contact with cards or money, various things like that. So I think that's one of the big sensitivities and why we'd want to think about that. And then we also normally are passing back, a parking ticket. So what do we want to do with that? So real quick, I'll just kind of pause and Brian, Grant, or Jarrid, and maybe Grant, I'll start with you, is kind of what are you thinking when it relates to parking, and kind of do y'all charge for parking today, and what thoughts have you had about this?
Yeah, so most of our parks do charge for parking, and like Randy said, it's it's a huge source of revenue, with very little upfront cost to us. I mean, obviously you pay for a parking lot, but it's a pretty large revenue stream. So some of the ideas we've been kicking around. Do we suspend paying for parking at some of the parks to try to drive attendance, to help out those guests that maybe don't have as much expendable income available to them, or disposable income available to them, or do we phase it back in? It's definitely revenue that we want to keep. So looking at different options, and like you said, do we want to limit the contact with the team members and the guests? One of the ideas that just came up from conversation is, what if we started charging a parking fee for every ticket and just kind of build it into the admissions? One of the comments was, well, hey, what if someone comes in with 25 people and they're driving a van, do we charge each and every one of them? Well, you could take it as a tax with a cap on it. So there's a fee on those particular tickets. So it goes up to a certain amount and then just stops. So there's different ways of looking at it. It's definitely something that we want to continue on going, or continue on with it. However, just determining what's going to be the best for our operation. Some of the parks might be better just to suspend parking fees for a little bit and then slowly reintroduce them as the summer moves on. Other ones, we might be looking at changing how we structure that. So it really depends. Again, it goes back to each individual attraction, but I think there's options that you can have. You can utilize the system to try to make it a little bit easier for you, or a little bit more seamless for your guests, especially for the team members as well. The less complicated you can have the process for them, the better. Whether it's we push as much as we can to online tickets. So if we're selling our online tickets and we force the sale of a parking ticket with per purchase, that's one way of getting around it. So if you buy 10 tickets, you got to buy a parking pass or a parking ticket. So there's different ways of handling it. For us, it's definitely something we want to continue. It's just figuring out what's going to be the most efficient and the most beneficial for the guests and the guest experience. Because the more complicated you make it for the guests, the less likely they're going to want to do it. But for us, it's a huge source of revenue for a lot of our parks. So we definitely want to hold on to that.
Grant, I think you bring up some good points there. One of the things, if we jump back to when Randy was talking about what's temporary, what's permanent, I think the very first day that we open, we're going to have a lot of temporary things. We're going to put in place, because we're not going to know what's really going to come the next day. So I think, one situation, an easy decision might be is to say, hey, you know what? We don't know how great people are going to like interacting directly with an employee in a toll booth. What if we suspend parking, for right now? And then how do we leverage that suspension in a positive way? It makes my experience of the attraction a little bit cheaper. So it's kind of a discount. So taking maybe that, hey, we don't know an answer to this question yet. We know that we don't want to do anything bad, and then leveraging that decision in a positive manner to help the attraction, I think is a great idea. Brian, Natural Bridge Caverns, any thoughts on parking there?
This is actually an interesting topic. We've spent the past year with a big park planner kind of in a reimagining the park exercise for future growth and expansion. And they were actually surprised that we weren't charging for parking. And so that has become something that we have started to look at wanting to do. And now we have COVID-19 floating around, and all of the questions that Grant is asking about needing to keep the revenue stream, we're asking about whether we want to actually start it. Yes, it would be a source of revenue that we could bring in, but there's lots of pros and cons that are floating around in our mind. So we don't currently choose, to charge for parking. It's free. We've actually used that in a lot of our marketing of, a little underhanded jab at all the big parks that charge for parking, and hey, look at us, we don't charge for parking, it's free. And so that's actually, we feel, kind of been a positive for us. But like I said, this past year we've been thinking about it. I think eventually we will be there doing that, but COVID-19 has caused us to start asking a lot of questions about whether we do it now or do we push it off. So I think we're in the push off mode right now.
Thank you, Brian. And then Jarrid, what's happening at the zoo?
So we haven't necessarily discussed the changes that are going to take place with that. While everybody talks about the revenue stream that parking creates, which it does, and it's a big revenue stream for us, it's also a benefit for our members. So if we're suddenly making that free for everyone else, then that benefit isn't really a benefit for our members. And especially times like right now, we're really pushing all the benefits that they are receiving with their membership. And that's a big one that people always talk about because we're limited in parking. So that's really one that we have to hold on. But I think some of the points that have been brought up and the ideas, I think, are good ones that we'll explore, whether that is adding it onto admission or selling it online. Any way we can to kind of reduce that touch point will be something that we look at for sure.
That's great. Randy, can I ask you to advance it one? Because I think, we've talked a little bit about, do we want to move to pre-selling parking? So is that just now an additional element, additional item that somebody can just easily add during the online purchase process, that then at the toll booth, maybe we're just scanning it, right? So it's very much like a normal access control point. We provide an option for folks that want to maintain more of a distance in that situation, that they can transact in a different spot. And then we can just simply scan their ticket at the parking booth. So I think that's certainly an option.
And about technology, I'm reading some technology questions about touchless technology, and that's something that you could technically do in a pretty safe manner. You could scan a barcode through a window. You could just display that parking was included if you don't need to validate. And I've also heard conversations about just rolling the parking fee into the ticket, during this time period. And there might be an opportunity to just add that surcharge, whether it's a transaction fee for the whole transaction online, or it's just, one extra fee on every ticket. This is a good time to think about those opportunities. And I'll tell you, going back to Brian, when you're closed for a couple of months, this is an opportunity to try these new things when you come out of it, because there's going to be a segment of your audience that is going to recall that you paid for, that parking was charged, but there's going to be another segment that's not going to remember.
That's right.
This could be an opportunity to have some pricing initiatives that you've been holding back on because you can change your price. You could up your price and you could try to recapture revenue. Especially if you're going to see a drop in attendance when you reopen, you could have a more customized VIP, gold level experience. You raise the price a little bit, and you charge for parking. So it's something you can.
Yeah, pricing, Randy, is something that we also, we're a park that dynamically prices our tickets, and we've been in conversations with the algorithm provider that we use to determine those prices to see, what is the sentiment going to be? Is it going to be a sudden rush, in which case you would think, well, maybe prices need to elevate some over normal? Is the market going to be weak? Do prices need to then reflect that to try to get people into it? And it's, I think this whole experiment in social life is throwing economists fits, because, they don't really have a good answer, because it's just like the rest of us. Well, we'll need to wait and see on it. And you just can't get that solid, for sure response that you're trying to always get from them.
There's nothing to compare it to. I think that's
exactly.
Yeah, it's funny about to continue some of these other conversations about pricing and parking is that we're going to just need to continue to innovate. There's a lot of points that I'm making about self-service. There's some people talking about Kings Island. Jarrid, that's, just around the corner, having some self-service opportunities for pass holders. They can scan their pass. They don't have to talk to anybody. They don't have to touch anybody. They just scan their pass and the gate lifts. I think there's a customer of ours in the UK that requires parking to be paid in advance, but they have an integration with a license plate recognition system. And this is, Jarrid and I were just talking about this earlier today. You buy your ticket in advance, you put your license plate in, and then when you leave, the camera sees your plate and knows that you were expected. It knows you paid for parking in the gate list. So this is a time for innovation. Necessity is the mother of innovation, is what we were kind of talking through this, and this is an example that maybe it's time to innovate a little bit more in our parking booths. Anybody want to contribute? This is an opportunity now. Does anyone want to add a suggestion of what they're doing in their neck of the woods with parking? If you want to add a thought, we'll just give you a moment or two and just go ahead and hit that raise your hand button, because I guarantee there's some good ideas out there, some discussions. Otherwise, we're going to move on to kind of our main entrance areas. Right. So front gate admissions. We saw, Happy Valley's not having any admission booths, and these are some of our customers. These are Galaxy users or Gateway ticketing customers. And I started to look through this, and some of this we're just not going to be able to do. How are you going to have people walk right up? Sure, there's some glass here, but, Rand, what are you guys going to be doing differently? I mean, how are you going to handle money? What does that look like, in the future?
Yeah, so, most of our ticket booths, you have that standard glass in front of you, so that's not too much of a concern. But passing, money through or passing a card through, something that, we've been trying to get away from for a while. And one of the things that we started rolling out, and we tested it a little bit the past year, and now we're just going to push it out to all the parks, was going as cashless as possible with contactless payment. So with our EMV readers, making sure that you can do near field with it. One of the other big things that, kind of drove the finance people a little crazy at first was getting rid of signatures. So we're not passing that paper back and forth. We did that to some of our locations to speed things up, but now it's more of a necessity to sort of break that interaction where you're physically passing something back and forth between two people. One of the other things that we did is removing all the prompts from our EMV readers. So basically it just pops up and says, insert, tap your card. So there's less interaction with the actual reader. So they're not sitting there saying, oh, is this the correct amount? Yes. And kind of going through it. So just kind of do those little tweaks to make it as easy as possible. One of our parks in Australia uses stored value on RFID wristbands, at least for the season pass holders. We used to do it for all of the ticketing folks, or everyone who came into the park, all of the guests, but we sort of scaled back on that. But they can do contactless payment where they load $50 on their band and they can pay for it at each stand, so they don't have any money passing back and forth. Works great because it's a water park, because no one wants soggy bills lying around. But those are the sort of things we're thinking about. How can we limit the guests' interaction with the team members in terms of physically touching back and forth or physically handling something that they've handled? On the flip side of it is, how do we limit the handling of items between guests too? If you have a pen there where they're constantly picking it up to sign a receipt, that's a point of contact. Or if they're constantly having to touch the EMV reader to prompt through a transaction, then that's a touch point as well. So those little things you can do to kind of tweak it. For us in the parks, we tried it out with it actually sped up our operation, so we weren't dealing with the whole receipts going back and forth or the prompts hitting on there. So we're rolling it out to all the parks just to kind of to eliminate those little points of contact as much as possible. And I think it goes back again to the comfort of the guests. It's making sure that they feel comfortable coming to the facility. Those little things that can make a big difference.
You guys can see we're kind of doing a webinar on the fly, so I apologize for typing in the background. I'm just trying to incorporate a lot of what you were saying. Man, removing the prompts on the EMV, I think that's the greatest thing. When I went to my grocery store, that was one of the things that absolutely freaked me out. Like I literally just tried to barely touch anything.
Yeah, I was at mine. I was doing the same thing. It's like, would you like to use your points today? I'm like, no, I just want to pay. Let me through. And receipts is something else. And this is a link on our community. I'm not sure if you guys want to scan this QR code, but we had one of our customers, I think it's one of our European customers, was saying we don't even want to have receipts anymore. And so they were asking, like, how do we eliminate receipts? And of course, our software, you don't have to have a receipt. But what we ended up with was more of a prompt, like, yes, you want a receipt. The guest could, hit the yes, it produces a receipt or not. Certainly, there's some on-demand type receipts that we can do. We've got a couple customers that are collecting emails and phone numbers and delivering receipts in another way through their CRM tools. So there are items that you can do. I love this. This is something that happened in the UK. So Rob Cameron, the CEO of Barclaycard Payments, is really, this is an article here from TechRadar Pro, but he's quoted that he and others, they've raised the limit up to 45 pounds for a tap instead of there was previously a 30 limit. So these are the types of things that are just going to be needed. Apparently, when this happened previously, it took a long time to make this change, but now they were able to do this really quickly and easily. So just like you were mentioning, Grant, maybe we don't have to take a signature. Maybe we don't have to do these things. We want to encourage as many people to buy ahead of time online, but then if they do have to interact with us, look at different tools. You mentioned it already, but this is the time to make sure that your current terminals and your software can manage and use Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, or Google Pay, Google Wallet. This also might mean that on the right-hand side, most of us, I mean, if you go look at your credit cards, I got to be careful here to not share all the credit card information, but this is my Costco card. It's probably not even showing up with my camera background, but I was going through my wallet and all but one of my credit cards is contactless. And that's just something that maybe communicate. Guys, hey, if you have a contactless credit card, just tap to the wallet. You might want to get these NFC readers right now. Make sure that you can get them. You can affix them on the outside of your ticket booths or extend them 6 feet away. So maybe you do create some distance so people can tap their card and they don't have to physically touch anything to make a payment. So
Randy, I do want to point out that, I've been to a number of facilities before all this where, they sold lanyards to put your ticket or your hard card, if that was the media, where you can buy that to keep your ticket around your neck. I've also been at a grocery store myself where I've loathed touching that pin pad and wished, because I have a stylus at home, I try to remember to bring with me, don't every time, wish I had that stylus so I didn't have to physically come in contact with those buttons. So one thing that is a possibility, just like you have that impulse buy add-on of the lanyard, an impulse buy add-on at the ticket booth where it's an individually wrapped stylus where somebody can just use that the rest of the day for all their purchases.
Yeah, definitely have near that stylus your sanitizing equipment, right? Your wipes and whatnot too, so that your customers and make sure you don't run out. Have them there. Make sure customers know that they're there. Or something Grant and I were talking about. If you have an environment like this, and you do have something, have a staff member walk up before the next guest walks up. Have them visibly wipe down the area. They have gloves on, they wipe it down, they step away, and then they can say, hey, we can help you at Windows 7 now. That is what we need to do to promote safety. So the person that had the question earlier that we are looked upon as being, safety number one in our industry, those are the types of things we're going to need to continue to do.
And
Hey, Randy.
Yep.
To that point, prior to us having a mandatory shutdown here in Texas, we were actually utilizing what you just said, an employee walking around and physically cleaning every surface every 30 minutes. And guests were actually coming up and thanking us for doing it. So they definitely perceive it. They're watching for it, and they notice it, and they appreciate that level of effort of, care to it.
So we're going to see that shift of labor. We might not have ticket booths. We might do something different in different areas, but we need to be visible and smiling and proceeding as normal and have our guests' safety in mind. The sweeps that walk around the park, they wear aprons. They're just going to need to have, sanitizing wipes with them, disposable sanitizing wipes that they can hand out. Anything we can do to help the guests feel comfortable and enjoy themselves.
And I think that speaks to another question that came up earlier about how to handle item storage. Rachel had asked how to deal with item storage, bag checks, and lockers because they could be a germ hotspot. And again, I think that point of having regular visible cleaning of those spots, but also having the wipes available. So when, as a guest, I take my stuff out of my locker, I can wipe it down so I have that peace of mind before moving on. Is going to be a very big thing for that experience and that feeling of security.
Yeah, and a couple things. Gateway can help you out with those NFC readers, by the way. DJ, I'm reading your question. Otherwise, talk to whoever your terminal provider is. Janelle, you bring up a really good point, Janelle. Janelle from the Phoenix Zoo is changing the perspective. A lot of these safety elements, it is for your employees, right? So we're putting on the show for your guests, and we're going to keep the guests safe. So we're going to do what we need to. But in the same token, those same level of effort is to protect your employees as well. Grant and I went back and forth, at what point is the ride operator, at what point are you protecting the ride operator from the guests? Because all the guests are going on the ride and they're seeing that one person. So I think there's going to be a balance there, but as long as my suggestion for you, Janelle, and for everybody is that treat your employees just as well as you're going to treat your guests. Of course, we also want to put our employees on a pedestal. They're critical to our operation, and they are the number one most important functioning unit of our operation. But make sure that they're safe and comfortable as well. As long as we treat them as well as the guests, don't ever put your employee in a position that you wouldn't do for your guests or vice versa. And then you're probably protecting everybody as best you possibly can. So really interesting points there. We're going to continue the conversations and move on a little bit here. And let's talk food and beverage. These are my favorite things in any theme park. I like to get a burger and I like to make it my way. But I guarantee you, these are some changes we're going to need to make right away. If your food and beverages stations look like this, if you have any fresh produce, there's going to be changes. In fact, Grant, you live in Pennsylvania, and you were telling me about some changes, and I put a slide up here for you. This is one of your favorite establishments, correct?
It is I could talk about Sheets all day. For those of you that don't know Sheets or aren't familiar with it, it's a restaurant that happens to serve gas as well on the side. It's probably it's a restaurant, one of my favorite places to eat. Jamie Flaherty can attest to it every time we meet up. I'm like, you want to go to Sheets? And he's like, there's something wrong with you. But, he's probably one of the best BSMs who we've ever had, slightly better than John Patterson. I might have gotten a text to plug that. But anyways, going back to Sheets, they've made some pretty interesting changes. I actually haven't been inside to see most of them, The way I found out about it is they're really good about interacting with their customer base. So as soon as the COVID-19 thing started taking off, they were sending emails out about, oh, here's ways to have precautions. Here's what we're going to do. Here are the steps that we're taking. One of the things that they started to do was they got rid of all the self-serve beverages inside. So the self-serve coffee, self-serve drinks, they took all of that stuff behind the scenes, and they're forcing the customers to purchase that from their kiosks. So you have to go up, one of their team members will do it for you. So you have to order your beverage or order your coffee. The same thing with all the condiments that go with it. They'll hand them to you in a little bag. If you wanted your creamer or your sugar or whatever, they'll hand it to you. So that's one of the things that they've done. They've also gotten rid of all the self-serve. Oh, you have a whole list there. Self-serve items that are in there. So like the donuts, the little cakes and stuff you could purchase. They've temporarily put them on hold. I think they've done a great job. And I guess was saying, I haven't actually been inside to see it. It's just all information they've given to me. I went and got gas the other day, and at their pumps, they had a little video playing, explaining what they were doing to keep their customers safe. There was a message from their president and CEO saying, hey, we know this is an inconvenience for you, but we're trying to make sure that both our team members and our guests are as safe as possible. So they, did a fantastic job. I don't know, do you have the slide on here with the app that they did as well?
Yeah, I mean, you were telling me even, I think this is from today or yesterday, they introduced, they updated their app.
Yeah, after we talked yesterday, I got an email from them basically saying, hey, we've done some updates to our apps to help out the customers, so you can still come in and use the store. So what they're doing is in their app, you have the ability now to scan items and pay for it and just walk out the door. So you don't even have to interact with the team members that are in there. So it's kind of a cashierless system where you just go in and you want your Coke bottle or your Coke, you scan it with your app, you pay for it, and you can walk out the door. And it was ways that they reacted to this situation, both to keep their team members safe and to allow the guests to have a experience that they're used to.
You must be one of their number one fans if you're getting emails from them to advertise their new app.
I am a Sheets freak, so I've gotten up to the top level a few times. It's like Delta's diamond status. So.
Well, I could see that there's a little, you're basically Wawa or Sheets. And if I was talking to our Cincinnati friends, we could talk about Skyline versus Gold Star to make Jarrid smile as well.
We don't even have to bring Wawa into the conversation. It's, it's just about Sheets. But I think they did a fantastic.
Cincinnati. No competition between Skyline and Gold Star.
So, I decided to change my background a little bit. I'm over here at the churro cart. By the way, my understanding is Disney's advertised or publicized their churro recipe. So you can take a little bit of Disney parks and resort homes with you and make your own churros. The conversations that we were starting to have now was really about fountain drinks, right? This is the time when you're going to need to negotiate with your vendors and come up with solutions because I did go to a restaurant. It was a pickup order, and they gave me cups, and they only had fountains. And I was petrified. I wasn't scared for me catching something. I was worried that I was contaminating something, right? So they gave me cups, and I just sat there and looked at it, and I had to strategize what I was going to do because I touched the cup and then I filled it up with ice and then I got my water and I touched the button. And of course we love freestyle machines. So for those of us who are using these, obviously you touch them. So we are going to include in this presentation our friends over at Alea Kiosks have a little list of how to take care of your touchscreens. We're going to make sure to include that in the presentation notes because you're going to need to sanitize your touchscreens. But you also might need to have an employee that works the freestyle machine. As crazy as that is, you might need an employee nearby that actually, with gloves and protection, is serving, or you're just going to need to not have fountain drinks for a while. Because how do you do a refill? I drank the drink and I go back up. Now I'm worried that I'm somehow, got my, my germs back on it. So, this is something that's really we need to consider and think through. How do self-service items become employee-served items? How do you demonstrate safety? This is another time where I would love somebody with a F&B background to contribute or share. Grant or anybody, Brian or Jarrid, have you guys thought? Actually, Jarrid, this is one of your facilities here. Well, I think it was one of your older facilities, right?
Yes, it was. It's gone now.
You have food trucks right now in place of this, so you kind of calling up people. Jarrid and I were talking about food delivery and strategizing what that might look like. Pre-ordering food at an attraction might become the norm. You might pre-order food, and you might bring your food to guests or have it waiting for them. The idea that Jarrid and I were talking through was, styrofoam coolers that you can get relatively, really inexpensively with a sticker on it that has a little, like the Cincinnati Zoo logo, and maybe has a name and a time. I might go up to the Safari Grill and somebody might hand me my cooler that has all the items in it for my picnic in the zoo. That might be an experience that you would be charging for in advance. Or you could just let guests bring food in. Grant, can you bring food and beverages into your attractions?
Yeah.
Yep. So some places you might just need to not have your restaurant operation working 100% during a time period.
I think at the least with this, it's just making sure that your maybe indoor locations are not operational and you're doing the ones that are more open air and just having those items where people can come and pick things up. So I think the ordering ahead actually kind of solves a problem that was there before. The issue that we run into more than anything with our long lines is just the time that it takes to process the transaction. Usually the food is ready to go and people are waiting just because they're trying to get through the line, not so much get their food. So having folks be able to order in advance and just come pick up kind of takes care of an issue for us that was existing to begin with.
Molly's talking about table serve restaurants, and Molly, the reality is, in the conversations I've had, is that most of the attractions that I've chatted with are saying they're just not going to probably be able to operate any table serve restaurants for a time being. I think that's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow because we want to make our F&B revenue. So we just need to think of pre-packaging. Back in the day when I worked at Disneyland Resort, we were opening an attraction, a World of Color, and there were these kind of like picnic baskets that you pre-purchased in advance. So something like that might be some of the cues from the past that we need to look at. Obviously, deploying that is difficult, but brown bag kind of preparation might work for us. And maybe if it's from a vendor or partner, it's sealed. It doesn't have the look and feel like maybe human, like it didn't come into human contact, while you're bagging it. So that's something to consider as well as you're moving forward with your F&B operations. And Molly, you're right, character dining. Molly asked a question about character dining. Well, character dining is going to change as well. Character experiences actually have a slide at the very end of me with, some princesses, and I'm like, what is this going to look like in the future as well? Your character experiences definitely need to be something to look at. I'm going to segue into retail operations because they're really close at the hip. This is one of our friends, Capilano Suspension Bridge. They do fudge, which is great, but they're probably going to need to reimagine this operation completely and looking more like a prepackaged fudge. So something that's prepackaged, it's wrapped, it's not by the pound anymore. You don't want to have humans touching the food items, even if they're wearing protection. So it's something to consider looking at. I love this is one of my favorite gift shops around. I think this is the Jacksonville Zoo, but there's a lot of grab candy here. They have a lot of bulk candy as well. So some of our establishments, we're going to need to consider how we touch handle items. How do we move around with the bulk candy? How do you reconfigure your stores? Matthew, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that there's, again, if we're thinking about kind of the first days after we're reopening attractions, we're going to be probably primarily concentrating on outdoor space, right? Because outdoor space is going to be, assumed to be safer than indoor space because of the air circulation and things like that. So I think one of the things it provides an opportunity for us is let's rethink how we take that retail experience outside. So obviously a lot of attractions have carts or things like that, but this may be an opportunity that we need to look at additional carts and additional outdoor experiences that bring some of the things that we might have to close up inside out to actually be transacted upon. I also think that we're probably going to have to think about our flow in our stores, because a lot of times, and especially maybe smaller attractions, we have a lot of great merchandise and we've maximized every inch of space there. But I can tell you right now, in grocery stores, right, I walk down an aisle, which are fairly wide, and there's two people going either way, and then I'm trying to go in the middle, and it starts to feel really uncomfortable. And I think as consumers, we're still going to have that as we try to go to these other experiences. So we might want to dial back and, hey, let's make sure that our top selling SKUs are on the sales floor. But maybe some of the other stuff, maybe it took a little more space or whatnot. Let's put that to the side initially, or let's maybe find an opportunity to move that outdoors where we can expand that distribution. So I think those are some important considerations when we're thinking about that retail space.
Yeah, definitely analyze what is working, what's your high profitable items, and what sells quickly and what's prepackaged. Dippin' Dots is a good example. You might have Dippin' Dots that you scoop out. You might just need to go to the prepackaged variety for a little bit, just during this time period. So we're going to start winding down. I want to let you know that we definitely have more conversations we could have, rides and attractions. This is a picture of my daughter and I in Knott's Berry Farm. Certainly there's a lot of considerations. You're going to need to slow down your throughput. You're going to need to visually show people that you're safe, right? You're going to need to wipe down these things for a period of time if you're going to operate them. So definitely you need to keep that in mind. This is actually a picture of one of our gatherings of our community. But social distancing on a train or a tram, this could be the new norm, where maybe you do space everybody out every other seat. So it's definitely interesting. I want to talk about a lot of our locations where they have rides and attractions like this. They typically sell wristbands for like unlimited use. How are you going to put wristbands on people? I'm not sure. Jarrid, I think you do wristbands today? And Grant, how are you going to put wristbands on people in this new norm, or are they you're just gonna trust that they're going to do it themselves?
Our parks that use wristbands, they actually just trust that the guests are going to do it themselves. They already don't put it on, so it won't be too much of an operational change. But yeah, if you have you're buying an unlimited wristband to buy unlimited drinks for the day, that's something you got to watch the guests to make sure they're putting it on, so they're not just passing it off, or really, strictly enforce the use of the wristband. And I could say back in the day when I was a ride operator at the park that I worked at, we had wristbands for rides, and we kind of paid attention to it, we kind of didn't. So it's one of those things you've got to impress upon your team members to enforce it if that's the route you're going to go on. But yeah, I think it's going to be a little uncomfortable. Like the example just came up with the grocery store with Matthew. It's going to be, for a while, it's going to be uncomfortable to get close to a guest. The team member is not going to feel comfortable doing it. The guests are going to feel like you're invading their personal space, because we went from a personal space bubble about this big to 6 feet now, where we expect people to not enter it. So it's going to be a little bit of a change up. But for us, at least, we're still going to be using wristbands at the facilities we use wristbands at, and nothing really is going to change because our team members aren't physically putting them on the guests. They're giving them to the guests with the understanding that the guests know that they have to have those on to be in the facility or to use the function of it.
Yeah, and that shows you, a theater, the conversations we've had with some folks is that the 4D theaters are probably going to be closed down for a little bit of time as well. Big theater space, we were talking with John Rouse, the VP of Operations at Aquarium of the Pacific. They have I think it's a 300 or 400 person theater that just opened, and they're exploring going down to 100. And they're talking about, leaving every other row open. We talked a little bit about, you don't want people sit themselves or not, but it's interesting. I think our guests at our attractions are going to look for us to help them out through this period of time. Matthew was talking about, if you go sit down in a theater and you and your family are spaced well apart from other people, that's great until another person or another family sits too close to you. then all of a sudden you're uncomfortable. You're not going to enjoy the experience. So for a period of time, if you're going to have theaters, you're probably going to need to kind of sit families in areas and section off areas. It's probably going to be some of the new norm.
I think one of the things I think that's important there is helping to communicate clear rules to everyone. I think might help to demonstrate an attraction's abilities there, right? It's probably going to be difficult for you to hand seat everybody in a 150 person seat theater so that you assure spacing. But I think, if we can demonstrate other ways where we're helping to educate through signage, through spiels, through multi-language communications, kind of the expectation of how we're trying to ensure security and safety in space, I think that'll go a long way versus there being nothing, right? And me just fending for myself. So I think it's all about ways that we can demonstrate to the guests of, creating safety and safe spaces for them as much as we can control.
Yeah, and safe spaces in a water park is another one. We were talking a lot about that. Water parks an area where you're naturally gonna Grant. I have to talk water parks really quickly because this is an area where water parks are probably looking and seeing, wow, we might make it. We might be able to reopen in June. And people are thinking about the safety around the water park and the chemicals of the water park. But the area in the water park that is really going to need some adjustment is probably going to be that body-to-body contact that's very typical in a line with very little clothes on as you're queuing, So when you and I had the conversation, we were kind of saying, well, it's great if you have a lot of inner tubes because inner tubes, you're carrying inner tubes up a queue and you're kind of naturally staying away. Have you guys thought about what you're going to be doing at the water parks?
We don't have a definitive plan, and I talked to a few of the parks and come up with some ideas or talk through some processes. One of the things that popped into my mind, I stealing it from the roads department in Pennsylvania. They had a program a couple of years ago where they had these big signs. They had a high crash area where they wanted to keep distance between the cars. So they had a whole educational program with signs, and they actually had some commercials at one point that basically said, keep 3 dots between you and the car in front of you. And they painted dots on the road to give a visual representation. That'd be something you could do. It's pretty easy and cost effective to put dots in your queue line when you want to keep guests apart. But I think it's definitely that queuing is where we're going to see most of our issues, because coming down a slide, you're not really with other people. You're either with people that you've already been with all day, or you're by yourself. So there's a social distancing there. The water's really not a concern because the chlorine is going to kill any virus that's in there. And, COVID-19 is a respiratory virus, so it needs to be put in little droplets in the air. So you're not worried about water-to-water contact or water contacting someone's mouth and then coming into contact with another guest. So it really does come down to that, and it's figuring out what works best for the facility to keep those guests moving through while providing information. And I know we all know that the guests don't always read the signs, don't really pay attention, but I think this is a set of circumstances where we're going to see guests paying attention to what's going on more so than they have before in the past. So giving them those cues to help facilitate the outcome that you want in your facility, I think is going to be the key here. Whether it's putting dots on the ground and saying hey, while you're in the queue line, keep 2 dots between you and the person in the group in front of you, just to keep that spacing. And but you're going to have to do something, because our facilities are physically built to queue people, to put a lot of people in a small amount of space. And it's kind of rethinking those environments to utilize that concept, but to build it out for the environment that we're in today. It's not something that we're going to be able to go through in a park and tear out all the queue lines and restructure them so we have enough space. So you got to use your existing space to figure out how we can best provide that safety between you and the other guests and have the guests feel comfortable, and at the same time enjoy their experience at the park. So I think it's just educating the guests and coming up with a way to get that spacing built in so they understand where they're at.
Yeah, that's awesome. We were talking with a lot of zoos that might just transition to, a golf cart model, where they bring families. Jarrid, you and I were talking about this. I think we're going to run out of time, but, we just have to think creatively, Jarrid, where we're just going to, put families on golf carts and drive them around and have a really customized experience for them. Because, families are going to be yearning for this type of behavior. This type of experience. So we just have to be, thinking differently about what it looks like. Like you said, Grant, we're just gonna have to think differently about our space and how we're gonna operate.
Well, I think that it's really, you can look at that with different touch points, different experiences within the zoo, things that you wouldn't have thought of before, such as like a giraffe feeding or a goat yard experience where kids are able to get in and brush a goat. Like, what does that stuff look like now? Is that stuff that we need to pause on for the time being, just because the contact with the animals and everyone clustered together is so tight? Really, all that stuff has to be put under a microscope now.
Yeah. And there's also great opportunity to maybe to build something new that you maybe haven't done before. So, wow, we've had so much good conversation. We're just gonna we were gonna talk a little bit about restrooms. I don't think we need to say much. You might need to rethink, your restroom experiences. Create some social distancing. Sink water runtime is absolutely imperative, and temperature. We've all been told to wash our hands for a certain amount of time, and I've been at many sinks where I start washing my hand and the sink turns off. So little things like that. Don't forget to talk to your custodial teams. If your bathrooms look like this, you probably need to make some changes. There's some opportunity right now to make some changes there. And think of what that experience looks like. Last thing I want to just share, we didn't talk about this too much, but if you have turn bars, guests aren't going to be feeling like walking through turn bars. You might need to drop the turn bars for a period of time. You might need to count your guests' ingress and egress differently for a period of time. This is an area where very typically we'd be touching these with our hands. I know my 7-year-old loves these things and she's grabbing onto them. It's just little things like this. I just want to make sure we talked about some of this, these concepts here, that you might need to rethink the proximity. You might need to temporarily close this middle turnstile. You might need to permanently remove it and move it somewhere else. So you're going to have to think of every option for exiting guests and congregating guests in your facilities. With that, I'm going to make sure that there's not any last comments or questions. Matthew, I'm going to turn it over to you. Are there any questions that I didn't answer yet?
I think we've gotten to most of them. There's a chance that there'll be a couple that will follow up. I think, one of the things that and kind of why we started off today's session with kind of what's that number one topic is, we want to make sure that we're delivering content that's important for you and that's helping you to address the business problems that you're encountering right now. So one of the things that we'll certainly be leveraging is that feedback and that very initial poll, along with maybe some questions that you have submitted here that we weren't able to address. As we continue to build out these, as Randy took us through earlier, kind of the few that are coming up, but please stay tuned. Please look forward to more of our webinar Wednesdays. If you're not getting our emails, you might have ran across us on Blue Loop or in some other publication. Feel free to email us, marketing@gatewayticketing.com. Our team there will make sure that you're on our email distribution list so and you can sign up and attend so that we can all get through this together as a community.
So I'm in the Tiki Bar now, so it's hopefully a little bit time to have a virtual happy hour with some of your friends if it's toward the end of your business day. But on behalf of Gateway Ticketing and my friend Matthew, we want to thank our awesome panelists, Grant and Brian and Jarrid. Thank you guys so much for your valuable input. Thank you for all the great questions that came through. We're going to go through that question list and do our best to answer all of them as much as possible. And we'll hope to have this webinar up and ready for you guys to review and share on Friday. Obviously, be safe, everyone. We wish you safety, and we're here for you if you have any questions. So thank you guys for joining.
Have a great day.